Hello, I am Madeline James, and today we are going to be talking about naming languages, a little bit of conlanging, that sort of a thing. And so I want to preface all this before we get into this with, I am definitely not a conlanger. I am not a linguist. I am very, very unfamiliar with all that there is about conlanging in general. However, I reached the point in my writing projects where I really didn't like just pulling from existing names from different places, which is kind of what I've done in the past, is I will pick a country to sort of be a stand-in for one of the places in, the worlds I build and be like, okay, I'm just gonna you look at tons of names from those places and use those kind of names to give them distinct styles. And, I don't think this is a bad approach, but when I am doing as much world building as I am, there's a lot more stuff in there that could be a lot more unique that I could do, and also I don't love just stealing from other things when I'm not actually using anything from that culture, if that makes sense. I don't know. I wanted to stop doing it. I wanted to be able to create my own more unique place names. I wanted to be able to build more interesting things than just places, because in a lot of languages, the names of places, those might have parts in it that mean things. Here, we might, I don't even know what they are, but this is something hill, right? This is Green Hill. That's what we call it. And that means it's a hill that's green, or there's a lot of green hills or something, or maybe it's a joke or something, but that means something about the place. If we're looking at the name of a place in another language, if we're just looking at a map, looking at place names, those names might mean something very specific in that language, and if we use it, it could be really weird if we're oh yes, this is, and in the language what you're really saying is this is the rich port, and it's actually a really poor mountain place. That would be really weird and jarring for anyone who's familiar with that language, right? So we're trying to avoid that while also adding that own amount of specificity and depth to our names instead of just random things, right? So that's what I'm trying to do. So I started with, I'm trying to pull up my notes here, but I started with doing a lot of research on conlanging, and there's a couple of really good videos that I really like. There's a few by the guy who created the languages for Game of Thrones, they actually invented the Dothraki language, that guy is awesome, and I've watched a bunch of his videos. I have one of his books. I've gotten a few other books on the Conlanger's Lexicon and a few other things. I'll link them below. And I started doing research, right? This is an example page of some of my research, right? Just a bunch of random stuff. There's just so many different things when it comes to creating a language. It takes a lot of time to create a language. There are so many parts to it. Not only do you have the phonology, but you have okay, what are the rules on conjunctions and determiners and the different verb conjugation paradigms, and there's just so many different things. The grammar, the lexicon itself, it is overwhelmingly vast. And my thought on this is that if I ever need a full language like this, I don't think this is something that I currently feel I could do, or that I have the time to want to put on doing this. I would probably commission a conlanger to build something for me. There are a lot of generators online that if you want something that's you could do that and just have it generated for you and use that. I think those are great too. But this really showed me that this is not what I need, right? I want to build, for the most part, naming languages, which is basically just all the rules surrounding building names for people, places, things, that sort of thing, because my books are going to be in English. And I'm not going to include people talking in other languages. That's not something that I plan on doing, with one exception in my current project, which will be a spell language, but it's going to be very very specific sentence structure, so I don't have to build very much to make it work. But I realized that, I wanted to do that, and I tried doing a lot of the online generators and stuff like that, and it just didn't quite work for me and how my brain was thinking about it and my current level of understanding on how everything works. Alright, so I was editing this video and I realized that for most of the rest of this, right, I am just giving you a tour of my program, talking through things as they go, and I never kind of went through some of the basics of conlanging type things that I think is kind of important going into that. So I'm not an expert. It might be best to find a good intro video to watch before you continue, but I'm going to give you a quick, really brief crash course given that I'm not an expert, so keep that in mind. But I wrote some notes on sticky notes of what I think you should know before watching the rest of this. So first, a conlang is a constructed language versus a natural language that came about naturally. This is people that are, making conlang. So Dothraki is a conlang. Elvish, Tolkien's Elvish, that's a conlang. So it is a very complicated process. It involves a lot of steps. If you know much about language, it's a lot. But your first step normally is to decide on the sounds you're going to have. And this is typically based on IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet. And I'm going to put a graphic up here of that so you can see how crazy it looks. I have a lot of trouble with the symbols. And for the most part, I did not use IPA. I probably could have figured it out, but I started with English letters and sounds because that's what I'm writing. And the way you pronounce sounds and then choosing the letters for the sounds is just, it's not a step that's necessary for what I'm doing to create naming languages and basically just a written language. Like, it doesn't really matter for what I'm doing. So I'm not using IPA at all. And so the things that you should be familiar with here, though, are, you should already know vowels and consonants, right? Vowels, A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y, I think. And then consonants, the other letters. And those have a lot of subcategories, as you can see here. Those are typically based off the manner and place of articulation, if that makes sense. So like where in your mouth you're making the sound. And, well, I guess where in your mouth you're disrupting the airflow might be the better way to put it, and then how you're disrupting the airflow to make the sound. Which you can find videos where they'll kind of like explain it, and that's a better way to do it. It's not super duper relevant for watching the rest of this video. But I use a simpler set of categories than this because I don't need all these details for the rules I'm doing. So I will show what that is when I get there, but I'm using like stops, plosives, articulates, approximates, fricatives, I think, are the ones I'm using. But yeah, so you decide on the sounds you're going to have for your language. For me, that was just the letters, essentially. And then the next step is normally going through words and sounds, or words and roots. And so to kind of break that down, we all already know what a syllable is, right? That is, you have a vowel sound in the middle that has either optionally with or without a starting and or ending consonant cluster or sound. Words have some number of syllables. Sometimes they have one syllable, sometimes they have multiple syllables. And a syllable is made up of an optional onset, which is a leading consonant cluster, and the rhyme. And the rhyme is further broken into the nucleus, or the vowel cluster, so the nucleus is just the vowel part, and the optional coda, or the trailing consonant cluster. So onset, nucleus, coda. You could have a syllable with just a nucleus. You could have a syllable with a onset nucleus. You could have a nucleus coda. You could have all three, onset, nucleus, and coda. And different languages will have different rules for what sounds can be in each part, how many, letters can be in each part, how long each of those clusters will be, how many syllables you'll have in a word, etc. There'll be a lot of patterns. Normally they mark them with like CVC to show you can have consonant, vowel, consonant. You could have CCVCC, CCC, VC, CV, just V, VC. Like there'll be full lists of those for different languages. So that's important to keep in mind. And then another thing that we'll talk about is morphemes. And a morpheme is essentially the smallest unit of language that has meaning, if that makes sense. So it could be as simple as, most of them are just single syllables, but it'll be like, that'll cover all of your prefixes, affixes, suffixes, right? So if you have like pre something, or if something ends in ing or ly, like those are all prefixes, affixes, right? And then it also covers root words, so like by for to, right? And it also covers like free words that you can use in combination with other words, like cycle, I think would count as that. I don't think that counts as maybe it's a root word, I don't know. But like all those little parts that you can use to make up words that have meaning, right? And there's a lot of other things to do after that, right? Like there's a lot of grammatical things. There's, actually coming up with the alphabet to go with your sounds, which we're already starting with. There's a lot of stuff past this that I'm not really going to talk about much. I am only going to be talking about names, both for people and places. And these can be very complicated, right, with the ways that you can have them, right? Like names can be constructed a lot of different ways. You can have a personal name and a family name. You can have a personal middle family. You could have a family name and a generational name and a personal name. You can have like all types of different things that, like, the sky's the limit, right? There's so many different examples in real world languages. But as I mentioned before, there are a lot of really helpful resources for this if you want to dive more into this whole thing. Again, we're looking at a very, very focused subset and use case of conlanging right now with just naming languages for novels, basically. But I'm going to list below lots of resources that I think are super helpful. And I got a list of some additional resources from some of the conlangers in my Discord. So I got some resources for them. Thank you, everybody. And I hope between all of that, you can sort of figure out, what's going on. I don't feel qualified to talk much more than that about conlanging other than just showing you what I'm trying to do, because I really, really do not know what I'm doing yet. But yes, so let's get back into it. So I wrote a Java program, and I'm actually a Java software engineer. So I write Java code for a living. That's what I actually do. So I wrote a program, and I want to kind of walk you through it. And I'm not going to explain the Java logic, because nobody cares, right? But I'll kind of explain what I'm doing and how I'm structuring this, and sort of show it to you, and then we can try and build some more naming languages here that I need for my book. But I'm not currently planning on making this available if people wanted to use it, just because it's a Java program, and I don't know how many of you are Java programmers, but this is basically not useful for you at all if you're not a Java programmer. Most of the unique parts of it require you to custom code them, because I'm not making this for people to be able to do by themselves, right? I don't even know how you would do that. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there are ways to do it, but it's not going to work for what I'm trying to do here. So I'm going to show it to you, and I don't know. I don't know how useful this will be for people, other than just showing you what parts of it I'm building, and maybe if you were trying to build one, you could, follow through those similar steps and stages to do it yourself. Maybe, could be helpful. But yeah, let me pull this up and start screen recording so I can show you what I have here. Okay. So this is IntelliJ. This is the tool that I, develop my program in, and it's just called Conlang. That's what I called it, even though it's not a full conlang. But let's see here. So I had to define a lot of stuff, and this is all, again, this is to be specifically used by this program. This is not, you shouldn't take notes on this as in this is how these things work. And if you are a conlanger and you are familiar with all this stuff, you'll be like, that's not really how that works, but it's the way I have it set up for the program, / maybe I'm just don't know what I'm doing. Both are probably accurate. But so the first thing that I see in a lot of this stuff where you start with building a language is phonetics. And so I defined a letter. And a letter is basically it has a sound. And the conlanging that I'm doing is all phonetic. I'm not using IPA, which is the notations that are used to explain the sounds that are found in a bunch of different languages, because different languages can have the same letter meaning different sounds, or they could have different letters meaning the same sound, or it could mean different things in different cases. Normally in conlanging, you start with creating, your phonetic alphabet, or, all the IPA sounds that you want, and then eventually you'll translate those into actual letters, like what the actual alphabet is of your language. I'm skipping all that because I am writing books in English to be read in people's heads. They don't need to be spoken. So I basically want a average English speaker, English reader to be able to look at one of these words and, whatever they come up with, like I want them to have not a ton of options for how to pronounce them. Like I don't want people to sit there and be like, how do I pronounce this, right? Like I want it to be clear and perhaps a bit weird, but like pronounceable, right? And, whatever they pronounce in their head is correct. Like, I don't care about any of that other stuff because I don't have control over that. I don't personally find pronunciation guides in books to be useful. That doesn't work for my brain, so I'm not doing it in my books, is sort of the vibe, right? Like, I struggle with that a lot. So, I defined you have a letter. And then there are two types of letters. You have consonants, which don't look at all this stuff yet. It's going to be confusing. But essentially, there's a consonant, and this consonant will have a type. And the types I defined are mainly plosives, nasals, fricatives, and approximants. And I know this isn't a full list. There's tons of different types. There's more variations in here, like whether it's voiced or unvoiced. Like all of that, I don't care, personally, for this, right? That's too much. I don't care about that. And then I defined something that I called SSS, which is basically just so that I could define rules around the letter S, because the letter S I found is really weird, and by putting it in just the fricatives, I couldn't create the types of rules that I want. But I sort of created all these types, and there is in syllables, there is a ordering of which order these types of consonants can be in at different sides of the vowel. It's like a hierarchy, I guess, where like you can have this followed by this, followed by this, followed by this, and it like affects that ordering. And I'm mostly stealing that from English because, again, I want these to be pronounceable and be reasonably sounded out by English speakers, right? So I'm mostly stealing that ordering from English, but that's why these types matter. It tells you what ordering these different consonants can be in. And then I have vowels, which is literally just the sound, very simple. I then defined all my phonemes, which realistically, these are really just letters, but some of them are like multiple letters, right? Because they sort of represent a single sound in English. But so I have all my vowels, right? And then, here's the order. So plosive, affricate, fricative, nasal, approximate, vowel. That's sort of like the order, and then it's the opposite on the other side of the vowel. And that was sort of a reminder for me, but I built up, and you don't need to understand this or be able to read this at all. But essentially all this is all the different options, and then the rules. So like that's the letter, the sound, right? It's a plosive. And then I basically have a bunch of fields that define the validation, and this is base validation. Like this is what I think is required in order to make this like English readable. This is not as strict as English, and in some cases it is stricter than English because it's things that are allowed in English that I think are confusing, and so mostly the only ones I have here are letters this can't follow in the coda, things they can't follow in the onset, that sort of a thing. So like a P, I have it listed here that it can't follow this full list of, let's scroll down, sounds. So like you can't have FP, so like AFP or AVP, like it's things that are hard to sound out. Like I sat here and tried to sound all of these out, and these are the ones that I was like, no. So I did this for every single letter, and for some of these it's a class. So this is types it can't follow in the onset, so SG, so sk, and then like a vowel, so like sgong, you can't have. And that's why I created SS separately, because other fricatives make sense here, right? If that makes sense. I added a glottal stop, because that's fun. And then again, I just defined all of these different rules, all the different like ways I wanted to define them. And the way I did this sort of was I just sat and was like, okay, like I started randomly generating words, and I was like, ooh, this is weird, and then I wrote it into this part to make that not happen, right? And then this is all just notes that I have that are not actually used, but yes, so these are all my phonemes, whether they be vowels or consonants. So that's essentially this whole phonetic section, right? And again, this is all just like defining what these things are and how they can relate to each other just to be like pronounceable, like standard, easily pronounceable. So then I have defined languages. And so this is it's an abstract class, which essentially means it's like, think of this as like the formula or the form that you would fill out when you want to create one of these things. So this is the form for a language. In order to do this, you need to provide a language definition. Let's actually start there. And this is just all the different things you need to know. So which of the SS type consonants are a part of your language? Which plosives are part of your language? Which nasals, which fricatives, which approximants, and which vowels, right? And then this is weights, which this program uses a lot of weighting in terms of random generation. And what this essentially does is it tells you the odds of each thing coming up in random generators. So for the onset, which these are parts of a syllable, right? You have the onset, the nucleus, and the coda. The onset and the coda, wow, there's a typo there, ignore that. But those are all consonants, and your nucleus is a vowel to simplify it, right? So if you have an onset, what are the different lengths and how are they weighted? So I would have, and we'll go back over here. No, we won't. Yeah. But that's like, okay, you're at the beginning of a syllable, you can have either 0, 1, or 2 consonants. And say you want there to be a 50% chance of it having no consonants, a 10% chance of there being 1, and a 40% chance of there being 2, right? Like that's what I define here. And then I also define the number of syllables, like length weights for a name. So like when generating a name, what are the percentages of getting different numbers of syllables. So then it uses that for a lot of functions, which, you know, you don't need to actually look at any of this, but it uses all of that to be able to provide, you know, that information to other parts of the program when doing generation. And so what this builds, right, is it has that language definition with all those little pieces of the, like, phonetics mostly. I pull in language morphemes, which we'll get to in a bit, and used words. And this whole section is basically just as I use this language generator to build things, I can record them in the program and be like, hey, like this is a morpheme that I used for this. And it won't generate it again for something in the future, right? It's that sort of a thing. Which a morpheme, let's actually go over here. Right now I essentially have, these are like prefixes, suffixes, or like other pieces. And a morpheme is essentially the smallest thing of meaning in like a word or in language. So when you think of a lot of words that are like derived from Latin, like if you know Latin, you can kind of understand a lot of English words because you can be like, oh, this part means this, like bi means two and cycle means wheels. I don't know. So bicycle means 2 wheels. I don't know if that's actually correct, but that's the vibe, right? It's a small word or set of sounds that has meaning, right? And so I use that in a little translator in this program so that if I want to create like place names, like this is something mountain, I can have those stored like morphemes for that to use. So the other thing I have is a language builder. So then I created, as I was building this, like a test language just to test it off of. So I defined, you know, these are all the different phonemes, letters, sounds, whatever that I'm allowing for this language for testing, the vowels. And then here you can sort of see my weights. So this is essentially, you know, for a length of 0 onset, it's given a weight of 15, which it's only 15% if these all add up to 100, which I tried to do just so that it made sense in my brain. But, you know, 15 out of the total number of weights that are put into this map. And I just defined that. Very simple. And then I defined a few morphemes. And these are essentially like city, of, death, hill, green, big tree, town. Random things I came up with. And I just gave them random words, right? it's just for testing. And there's a lot of stuff in here. I wrote a lot of validation filters based off things that I think made sense. So like it has a filter for, is this a vowel? Is this a consonant? Does this contain any special double consonants? Which I defined as things that, like, I don't think it makes sense to have these consonants next to each other in a word. So like double H's, double V's, double Y's. I decided I don't want this generator to create that at all. Some regexes for checking other things, like does it start with double consonants? I don't want it to ever start with a double consonant. Lots of little things like that I defined. I created a word builder, which essentially what this does is it'll build a word, right? And it'll use all the random generators to determine, the pieces, like, is this a starting syllable? Is this the ending syllable? How many syllables are we going to use in this word? And then I built little custom ones, like this one will build a word with the given beginning, so like a prefix. Same thing with a suffix or a postfix, a word with a given ending, etc. Just like lots of little ones like that I have started to use a little bit, right? So I built all of this. This is my cluster builder. There's a lot of code in here, and a lot of this could have probably been built a little bit better, but it works for me. So let me show you how this works and how I'm going to use it. We have our test language. And what we're going to do is for our test language, we're going to build 50 words. So essentially where I started, again, was I just wanted to randomly generate words. And what this will do is it'll tell me what things could be created, right? And so, a lot of these, I look at this and I'm like Ode Hoyp. That doesn't make any sense, right? And these don't have any sort of consistent vibes to them, right? So what I would do, and I already did this, I started playing around with what I'm calling Jazlesh, which is the language that is going to be used by the side country in my book. So there's only going to be a few characters, maybe a couple mentions of this place. It's very, very minor, but I want it to sound distinct from the other people/places that are actually going to, be more present in this book. So I have this society here, and for the rules, what I essentially did was, because I'm only going to have a couple of instances of this, there'll be a few names, there'll be a few places, I need it to sound extremely distinct, more distinct than you would want a normal language, naming language to be, because it's going to be a little bit too limited. Things all look too similar. But I want it to have a distinct feel where people that are reading the book would see the name and be like, oh yeah, that's probably a Jazleshi name kind of thing, right? I really limited the different letters that are going to be in here. So I took out Y, I took out H, I took out the vowel U. I just took out a lot of them. And then I also limited the number of consonants I want. I made everything shorter, right? So for the coda, which, wow, I wrote this as code everywhere. I'm only allowing there to be 0 or 1 consonant, where in English you can have 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, I think. So that's really limited. That's going to give me a lot less options. And so I did this, and then I generated random words. And I've already played around with some other stuff. So this won't be exactly what it would have looked like at the beginning, because I've already added other rules, but essentially I then ran this. I got 50 random words. These are my random words. You can see these are a lot shorter, right? Because I'm not allowing them to be as long. They have a lot of similarities, right? You'll see a lot of similarities in these words, right? And what I did the first time is I went through and I just started, I copy pasted ones that I liked. And I'm like, ooh, I like this vibe. And I started copying them down. And then what I did from there is I started adding additional weights to different things that I liked. So I liked a lot of the vowel clusters that were O, I, A, I, E, I. I really liked that. So I gave those higher weights. And right now in the base program, it only gives a weight of every letter of 2. So that if you wanted to like make something a weight of 1 or a weight of like 0.1 or something like that, like you can make it rarer. But I wanted these vowel clusters to be a lot more common. So I gave them much higher weights. And again, this is a very like not used a lot, right? It has to be extremely distinct. So I gave these really, really high weights, which like you're more likely to get one of these than you are other vowels essentially, which I wouldn't do in a normal language, but for this it was fine. I did the same thing with the onset clusters. So this is the beginning of a syllable, right? So in the onset, it's more common for it to be a T or a JR. So that's like the T in Tivro, the JR in Drizo, right? Those are more common. And then I did the same thing with onset letters. So an onset that has a T, L, or J in it. Codas that have a Z or a V in them. And these are the things that sort of give you a consistent vibe in the nouns that you're generating, just because like these are patterns that will be distinct and noticeable. And even if you have a lot of rules, there's still so many potential combinations. And then having certain things be a lot more common and rare will give it, you know, more of a feel. So I did all of that, and that was included in all the words you saw generated, how they were just, like, they had more of a vibe to them. So I did that, and then what I did was I took one I liked, which was Jazlesh. I decided that was my language, and I decided that Jazlem was going to be, like, the name of this larger region that all shares that language, so that's Jazlem. And then I had to start thinking about the place names, because this is where it's like, I don't know if I could share this because of how building these rules work, but I'm only going to use this for building place names and people names. That's it. But I want that to be distinct. So places, instead of having this be like, oh, you have hill and blue tree and like all these other morphemes that could be used to build the names of the places, I decided that there's just going to be a suffix based off whether or not this place is in the jungle or not in the jungle, because it's a like mostly jungle dominated area. So I decided that was going to be a significant thing, which means it's a significant cultural thing, like whether or not they are of the jungle and not of the jungle. I don't know exactly what that is, because like again, I'm not building it out that far yet, but that is a thing of significance. So I took 2 of the random words that I liked, which, wait, no, they were already right there. Right, was these 2. These are, these are 2 randomly generated words that I really liked, right? Ladmray and Tivrays. Ladmray and Tivrays. I liked the sound of that. I liked that vibe. I wanted to keep that vibe. So I decided that the ends of that, which is Murray and Rays, yeah. Those are suffixes that mean of the jungle and not of the jungle. So I defined those, and I defined them as morphemes. So, you know, this suffix means of the jungle, and this one means not of the jungle. And this is mostly just so that I can remember when I'm using this. But then I wrote these 2 methods here, which are basically just build a name for a place that is of the jungle, and then build one that is not of the jungle. And all that does is it builds a word with the ending of the jungle suffix and not of the jungle suffix, right? Very simple. Again, because I'm not going to have a lot of this, I don't really plan on writing a story ever in this place, and if I did, I could add more nuance. But it's also a relatively small area, so this is fine. So I did that for my place names. And as I like run this a lot, because essentially what I want to be able to do is just run it a ton of times and be like, oh, I like this one, I like this one, I like this one. I can put it on the map. I can make lists in the library of like the ones I like. And then if I want to go in and use it, I just have to pull that file up, pick one I like, and then like add a comment like saying what I'm using it for, or that I'm using it in general. The other thing I needed was how I'm going to build people names. And I have a bunch of notes that I've been taking on various languages, not like tons of notes, but essentially like there are a lot of different ways that place or people names have like how you can make them, right? Like some of them are gendered, right? We'll have different endings based on, the gender of the person who does it. And that could be, a binary gendered system. It could be a, more complex one. It could be something that's maybe not gender-based. Maybe it's age-based. Like you have a different ending on your name depending on how old you are, which would be really interesting for sharing the same name in a family because, at each stage, your parents and your grandparents, if they have that same name, they'd have a different, prefix or postfix or something to the name to indicate their age. Like anything like that. Like you can have tons of things like that. You could just have endings that are more common. You can have different rules for names, like, they have to start in a consonant or they have to start in a vowel or, just whatever rules you're going to have to make it distinctly a name versus a different type of noun or different type of word in general. And then for surnames, and, some languages don't have surnames. Some of them have like complex things. Sometimes the surname is before the first name. Sometimes it's after, like they could stand for like, where they're from, what profession do they have, like baker as a last name means you probably come from a family of bakers, like way up the line of, So that's really specific to how you want to structure the language. Like that's, other than choosing the phonetics, that's the most like conlangy part of this whole thing. So for Jazlesh, what I decided I wanted to do, which that's this file, was I decided it was going to be gendered, the names, just because I feel like that gives me the least options and is the most like, that would be the easiest to pick up on the patterns, right, for a reader. So I basically picked 4 postfixes, and I have different endings based off whether or not it's following like a vowel or a consonant. So if, the last character is a vowel, it'll be lo. If it's a consonant, it'll be elo. And then a different one for females. And then essentially I just, use that in my generators for, okay, I can call this method as like build a male name, build a female name. And they'll have this distinct pattern. And again, these are all really really restrictive. But again, I'm only using this a little bit. So if I did ever need to expand this out, I could add a lot more options and it would still work. But so I have that. And then I decided for the surname, what I'm going to do is build surname. It's going to incorporate where they're from, right? Because I decided that that was a big cultural thing, whether or not they were of the jungle or not of the jungle. So I figured that would be an important part of, where they're from. So it'll have, the names will be whatever their first name is. And then the place they are from minus the suffix, and then the family name. So it doesn't have the jungle part in it, like whether or not they are from the jungle or not from the jungle. It just has the place name part, which maybe that means something, right? And I could always deal with that later if I needed to, but it's just not, there's not going to be enough use cases for me to build a pattern for that right now. So essentially all it does is it strips off that suffix from the place name, of the jungle or not of the jungle. Hold on. Okay, I'm back. My daughter she pooped, so I had to clean that up, and then she bit her finger. I don't know. I'm hoping she's quiet for the rest of nap time. Yeah. Anyway, I don't even know what I was talking about, but yeah. So for the surname here, they have that place part that is basically where they're from, with the suffix ripped off of it, a space, because I decided there was going to be a space, I don't know, and then the family part of the surname, which I like because you could have the same family living in different places, and this is sort of like you're the part of this family from this place, and you're the part of this family from this place, which I thought it was interesting, right? I like that. And then the building the family part of the surname is pretty simple. It's just a single syllable, and that's it. That's it. That's all it does, right? Single syllable, it's short. And so then what I did was I created a method that would just generate a completely random name. So it'll first do a randomizer to figure out if it's female, because that changes the name, right? It adds that to the details, right? Either female or male, and builds either a female name or a male name. It determines randomly, are they from the jungle or not from the jungle? Builds the relevant place name, stores that in the details, generates a place name of the jungle or not of the jungle, and then it will build a surname, again, randomly using that randomly generated place name. So you'll get all the details that are relevant for like that randomly generated thing. The first name, a space, and then the surname, which is the like place part, and then the family part. So if I go to, you know, my main method, right, which is what I actually run, comment out the word generator. But I can make this build a completely random name, and by A I mean this will build 50 of them. So then I can run this method, and it builds me 50. So I have a female that is not of the jungle from Oivres. So her name is Frizara Oivjays is the name, right? And, you know, some of these are weird, right? Like, not all of these I would use, and if I was going to use this generator a lot more, I would probably add more, like, validation, like, oh, I don't like this pattern, right? But for the most part, I'm fine just scrolling through this and picking things that I like. Tiv, I think that's a fun, like, last family name. Drazara, that's a cool name. Manara, cool name. A lot of Ozara, like, they have... Like, right, these are all very similar. Like, Ozara, Manara, Drazara, like, those are all very similar. Fira? Livavilo? Like, you know, some of these are kind of weird, right? But they're fun. And so I can pick ones that I think work. And, you know, that gives me a place that this is built. It gives me a family name. It gives me a person name, right? And so anytime I need to name a character like that, I can just run this generate a bunch and find ones that I like, and then I can go into my library and store them here, right? So I know these are going to be 2 place names. I don't know where they're going to be, right? Like, I haven't used them for anything, but I know they're place names and I like them. So as I decide I like things, I'll stick them in here, and then that won't get randomly generated for something else. So that's kind of what I've been doing, and I can store my family names here and just, you know, anything that I like. And this is kind of sufficient for a not very, like, prevalent language, right? Something that's only going to come up for a few naming language things. And so I haven't gone any further into the other 2 societies that I need to build names for, right? So I've kind of thought about a little bit the kind of vibes I want, which I think, let's see. So, and I haven't even named these languages, right? Like, I've done nothing. Like, this is all just copied from my test file. This is just if you do nothing special. So I need to go through and figure out which phonetics I like, play around with that, figure out which common clusters I like, if there's any letters or sounds or vowels or whatever that I want to be more common, if there are any I want to be rare, and then if I want any other validation, like, you know, there's like weird validation, like, oh, if it's a name, you can't have this following this, or it has to be, I don't know, this long, or... You know, there's lots of stuff like that. I can build up my library. I can build up all the builders I'll need for the different types of things I want to build, I guess. You know, like if I want to build names, if I want to add, like, I feel like for the main society, I want to do, what is it called? I have it in my notes, but it's essentially where you change the name to have different, like, meanings to it. Do we have examples of this? Written down what it's called? So adjectives that modify the noun, or like things like that. So if you want to call someone, like, you know, like your daughter, you might have a specific ending that you add onto their name to mean, like, oh, my daughter so and so, right? And it's not their name, but it's like something you add to the end. And this is something that you see a lot in, like, Eastern languages and stuff, like something San. In the Greenbone Saga, WoW by Fonda Lee, they have little things that essentially mean that you're a greenbone that you add to the name to basically, it's an honorific to be like, oh, you know, you are a greenbone warrior, whatever. So I like the idea of that, like doing something like that. And I wouldn't want to do that for a language where I was only going to have a few names in it and no one really speaks it, because it would just be too confusing. Like, if someone randomly calls them something else, like, I'd have to explain that in the text. Like, oh, yes, oh, what does that mean? Oh, well, it means this when they call them that name. Or it would just be confusing. And again, like, I would get no benefit of that in the book. So I want to leave all those, like, weird, like, conditional things to things that are going to be used enough that people would kind of be able to understand it, right? So I'm not entirely sure what I want to do for that, but I need to do some brainstorming, and I'll just, like, make a bunch of notes, and then I'll start defining stuff. But it is close to the end of nap time, so I'm going to have to stop for now, but this was essentially the tour of my program, and a little tour of, like, one of the sample, you know, languages that I put together. And again, like, it's a naming language that I currently have no names from, that I've decided are going to be names that I'm going to use, but it's set up here. So what I'm probably going to do is come back later when I'm ready to build one of the other languages, and we can sort of step through it together. But yeah, this is what I put together so far. And that concludes the first part in this Conlanging naming language adventure. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.